What if the silence you've been avoiding all these years was never your enemy? What if it was trying to introduce you to someone you had forgotten? You, yourself. Many people spend years running from silence without realizing it. The moment a quiet space appears, they reach for something. A phone, a conversation, a video, music, work. Anything that can fill the space, anything that can keep them moving, because stopping feels uncomfortable. And being alone with our thoughts can feel frightening. At first, silence does not feel peaceful. It feels loud. The moment the distractions disappear, something begins to rise to the surface. Thoughts, memories, regrets, questions, old wounds, unfinished conversations. The things we have spent years trying not to hear. This is why so many people leave silence before it has a chance to teach them anything. They mistake the discomfort of the beginning for the truth of the experience. But the beginning is not the destination. It is only the doorway. If you stay a little longer, something unexpected happens. You begin to recognize the voice beneath all the noise, your own. Not the voice of social media, not the voice of other people's expectations, not the voice of fear, not the voice that asks who you should become. The quieter voice, the one that asks who you already are. And perhaps, for the first time in a long time, you begin to listen. You begin to notice patterns. You begin to understand your fears. You begin to see why certain things hurt so much. Why certain situations keep repeating themselves. Why some decisions feel right and others leave you empty. The relationship slowly changes. You are no longer fighting your thoughts. You are getting to know them. And through them, you begin to know yourself. Perhaps one of the saddest questions we rarely ask ourselves is this: what has the cost of running been? Most people assume distraction is harmless. A few minutes here, a few minutes there, a little noise, a little escape. But years pass, and eventually we realized we were not simply avoiding uncomfortable thoughts. We were avoiding parts of our lives. Conversations that needed to happen, dreams that needed attention, decisions that needed courage, wounds that needed healing. And while we were running from discomfort, life quietly continued moving forward. How many opportunities have been lost while waiting to feel ready? How many relationships suffered because we were too distracted to be fully present? How many years were spent searching for answers everywhere except within ourselves? These are difficult questions, but perhaps they matter because they reveal something important. The thing we have been running from may not be the problem. It may be the doorway. This is one of the great paradoxes of life. The loneliness we avoid may be the path to connection. The uncertainty we resist may be the path to growth. The silence we fear may be the place where clarity begins. For years, we assume that peace exists somewhere outside ourselves. In the next achievement, the next relationship, the next solution, the next distraction. Yet, sometimes, the very thing we need is the thing we have spent years avoiding. Not because it is comfortable, but because it is honest. And honesty has a way of changing us, slowly, quietly, permanently. This is where something remarkable begins to happen. The neediness that once drove so much of your life starts to loosen its grip. You realize that many things you desperately chased were attempts to fill a space inside yourself. Approval, attention, validation, constant stimulation. The feeling that you always needed more. More people, more noise, more certainty, more reassurance. But as your relationship with yourself deepens, something else grows. A quiet sense of enoughness. Not perfection, not superiority, not detachment. Just a simple feeling that you are no longer abandoned by yourself. And when that happens, many things that once felt incredibly important begin to lose their power. Winning every argument, proving yourself to everyone, being understood by everyone, keeping everyone happy, keeping up with everyone else. The endless race begins to look different, not because the world changed, because you changed. And when you change, the game changes. One of the greatest gifts of silence is patience. When you are constantly running from yourself, everything feels urgent. Every emotion demands an immediate reaction. Every fear demands an immediate solution. Every discomfort demands an escape. But when you learn to sit with yourself, you discover something important. Not every feeling needs to be fixed. Not every fear needs to be obeyed. Not every thought deserves your belief. You become less reactive, more patient, more willing to stay present when life becomes difficult. You stop expecting immediate certainty. You become willing to wait, to learn, to try again, to remain in the discomfort long enough for growth to happen. Something else begins to change too, the way you see other people. When you stop running from your own fears, you begin to recognize fear in others. When you become familiar with your own struggles, you become less shocked by the struggles of those around you. The person who seems angry may be hurting. The person who appears confident may be terrified. The person who disappointed you may be carrying a burden you cannot see. Understanding yourself does not make you blind to people's mistakes. It simply makes you more human, more patient, more compassionate, more willing to see the whole person rather than a single moment. Perhaps this is why self-awareness often leads to forgiveness. Not because people suddenly become perfect, but because we realize none of us ever were. You become more willing to give people room to be imperfect. The same way you slowly learn to give that permission to yourself. And once that realization arrives, relationships begin to feel lighter. Not because nobody hurts you, not because conflict disappears, but because you stop demanding perfection from yourself and everyone around you. You begin to understand that every person you meet is carrying something invisible. A fear, a regret, a loss, a wound, a hope. And this understanding softens you, not into weakness, into wisdom. Perhaps this is why some people become gentler as they grow older, not because life becomes easier, but because they stop fighting reality. They stopped fighting themselves. And suddenly, small things become valuable again. A quiet morning, the sound of rain, a sincere conversation, a walk without a destination, a person who tells the truth, a moment of genuine connection. The world becomes less about stimulation and more about meaning. Less about escaping, more about experiencing. Less about collecting, more about appreciating. The irony is that when you stop running from yourself, you often discover you needed less than you thought. Less approval, less validation, less noise, less distraction, and far more presence, far more honesty, far more connection. Maybe that is the greatest lesson silence teaches us. That beneath all the noise, all the striving, all the distractions, there is a relationship more important than any other. The relationship you have with yourself, because wherever you go, you take that relationship with you. Into every conversation, every challenge, every success, every loss. And when that relationship becomes stronger, life itself begins to feel different. Not perfect, not easy, but lighter, more honest, more peaceful. Perhaps the goal was never to eliminate every fear or silence every thought. Perhaps the goal was simply to stop running long enough to listen. Because sometimes the person waiting for your attention is not another teacher, not another expert, not another voice. Sometimes it is the quiet voice inside you that has been patiently waiting for years to be heard. And once you finally listen, you may discover that silence was never empty. It was full of answers that could only be heard when the noise disappeared. And perhaps the most surprising discovery of all is this: the person you spent years trying to escape was never your enemy. The silence was not your enemy. The loneliness was not your enemy. The thoughts were not your enemy. They were simply trying to lead you back home.